Well, today I am so excited because this is a question that I've been wondering for a long time. I know that ADHD brains are structurally different. And so my question that I've had as a parent is there anything that can be done about that? Or what does that mean? Is there any way to support the brain development? And I'm so delighted here to have Bette Lamont so that we can talk about that and investigate that issue. Bette does neurological reorganization, and I'm going to ask her to explain all about that. But I've seen the testimonials that she has this as far as working with children and the amazing results that she has with children every day. So welcome, Bette.
Hi, Veronica. It's good to see you. And I'm going to just correct a little piece there that you've said. Yes, we work with brains. In fact, I would say something kind of surprising at the beginning. I don't work with ADHD. I work with brains. And as a consequence of working with the brain and its development, we get a lot of shifts in the functional behavior. And that's where I wanted to make a little bit of a correction, because structurally the brain may look identical between two children who have ADHD and the other who doesn't have ADHD, but functionally they may be operating very differently. So what I do is a functional neurodevelopmental assessment so that we can see where there may be some missing functions. And then out of that analysis, we can set up programs to rebuild, to reintegrate, or help mature those parts of the brain that are missing a trick or two. So because each brain is a universe unto itself, there's no common ADHD brain. And what I'm not looking for the commonalities. What I'm looking at is the uniqueness of each child. But the brain, there are certain brain anomalies in terms of functionality that tend to show up, and their expression gets defined as ADHD. So when I'm working with children and we're focusing purely on the brain, we are not looking to heal in any way ADHD. That would be a very improbable statement to make. But the fact is that many of the children with whom we're working, by the end of our work, are paying attention, perhaps not raging so much, able to read without distraction, don't have some of the same sensory processing issues. And so the question by the end of the work that we do is, do they even have ADHD anymore? And that's not a question that I answer. I give that over to the medical profession and the psychiatric profession. But I thought it might be useful to, out of all of the possibilities and all of the variations of brain function that we might see in a child who does have that diagnosis, it might be really helpful to look at least 3 of those many, just for the purposes of brevity today, and give you a sense. Would that be helpful to you, Veronica?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, so when I first started doing this work, ADHD, and this was like over 30 years and over 4,500 kids, ago. When I first started working with these children who were defined as having ADHD, there was one thing that most of them had in common, which was an immaturity between how the 2 hemispheres were talking to each other. And colloquially, I like to call them kind of little brother brain and big brother brain. And between those 2 hemispheres, the right and left hemisphere, there's only one band of fibers that can, that connects that. Otherwise, we have 2 separate brains that are off on their separate little life journeys. And there's this one bridge between the 2 of them called the corpus callosum. And that is a bridge that needs to mature. Child development, when it unfolds naturally, provides a way to mature that connection between the 2 sides of the brain, to help mature it. And those activities that mature the brain happen to be creeping on the hands and knees and doing certain kinds of reflex patterns and getting certain kinds of sensory input that help the brain mature that bridge. When it's not mature, we get some things that look like classic ADD, When that connection isn't mature, we may get children who get very, very excited and distracted, and their right brain is on squirrel programming. Whereas the left brain may know the rules, the left brain, which knows we're only going to have to sit here for 10 minutes, the left brain that knows the teacher will let us know when it's time to get up and move around the room. That left brain may be just as bright as this little right brain, but if there's no connection between the two, little brother brain goes off worrying about squirrels and pencils writing on paper, and left brain can't come over and say, wait a minute, it's time to pay attention for just a little while longer here. We're going to stay focused on this. It's okay. We're going to stay here. So that is one function that gets very much overlooked, that whole connection between the two sides of the brain. If the two sides of the brain aren't functioning fully and in a mature way, we might get children who hear something and then immediately forget it and then remember it a minute later. And I have definitely had those children who seem to be simply not paying attention, where in fact, they did hear mom say, don't take any cookies until they've cooled, and seconds later have the cookie in their hand. And then seconds after that, remember, oh, mom said not to take the cookie. Whoa, am I in trouble? So as signals go back and forth between the brain, you may get these inconsistencies of attention that look like just not trying hard enough. And I come from this position that children really want to behave. They want to pay attention. They want to be part of community. They want to be part of what's going on. And if they are not, I rarely assume that there's an intentional behavioral issue that we're looking at. I'm looking more at the I can't as opposed to the I won't. And I will tell you, I think 80% of the time, it's simply an I can't. It is not an I won't. It's not that I'm not trying. They're not trying hard enough. So the two sides of the brain have to have that conversation on an ongoing and second to second basis. The amount of input we have constantly is so overwhelming that any of us without a mature connection between the right and left hemisphere would have problem staying focused, staying on task. This is a matter of communication between, not what hemisphere gets emphasized. It's a matter of the cooperation between the two sides of the brain. When I first started working, about 1 in 30 kids would have problems at this level. And now I'm seeing about 1 in 30 kids who don't have problems with this issue. And the reason seems to be because we've forgotten what normal childhood development looks like. And when we put our babies in equipment, in walkers, in jumpers, in baby bimbos, and walkers with entertainment centers and even computers attached to them, we are preventing the normal developmental processes that help the brain mature at this level and in many other ways. But this is one that seems to be a real core focus.
Thank you for bringing that up, in the sense that especially that children do well if they can, and looking for that, because I know I spent a lot of time as a parent confused about that idea. And then once that shift happened and the question became, well, what skill is missing so that we can help this child? It shifted everything, right? So just thank you for highlighting that.
Yes, and there is a way to help the children, because the brain has a kind of plasticity that allows us to access all levels of our brain throughout the lifespan. So I've worked with ADHD adults who've done exceedingly well in very specific projects, like getting into law school, for instance, by going back and replicating the normal developmental sequence, the natural process by which all of us build a brain. So a second thing that I thought I would bring up is how trauma influences the brain. And this is really highlighted also by my friend and colleague, Dr. Gabor Mate, who works deeply with the role of trauma in creating ADHD. And what I am seeing is that safety is always more important to the brain than learning. Our first concern is always safety. And if we don't feel safe because of traumas that we have been through, the brain is always kind of scanning for those things that it needs to pay attention to that might be a risk. Now, what are the risks in a second grade classroom? The risk may be somebody about to tease you, or someone who's dropped pencil means, oh my goodness, getting out of the seat, time for lunch. These may be the things that draw a child's attention, and then you combine this with the corpus callosum and we get an issue and we get a lot of problem. But safety has to come before all functions of learning, because safety allows us to be curious. We can't be curious unless we feel safe, because being curious means that we're vulnerable. Vulnerability is a big risk. To say, I don't know, for a child who is traumatized, is a way to put them in a defenseless place so that curiosity can't arise. And when you are curious, your attention is able to focus so much better on the object of your curiosity. How do I put these blocks together so they don't fall down? How do I put these three words together so they make a sentence? So I think that trauma is deeply influential, and Dr. Mate, and I hope that people know about his brilliant work and his book Scattered, The Scattered Brain, which talks about how simply giving a child contact that helps them feel safe allows their mind to focus and home in on what is important for that assignment.
Thank you again. And can you go into like what might be trauma for a child? Now, when we use that word, I feel like there's so many different, like an array of what that might mean.
Thank you.
Can you share?
Yes, and trauma may mean adoption, which is one of the more significant traumas. Traumas may mean parents who are fighting and yelling and screaming after the children are in bed and the children don't feel safe to relax, to go to sleep. Trauma may be for the very sensitive child, criticism, constant criticism. No, don't sit that way, sit up. No, can't you, here, hold your pen. No, I didn't mean like this, I meant like that. I didn't mean like this, I meant like that. A constant kind of badgering of the child to behave and to rein themselves in. So you get a kind of catch-22 here, where we're trying to help our children who are wildly distracted, and in trying to get them to focus, we are constantly badgering them, setting up more cortisol production, which leads to more of a sense of a traumatizing environment. Trauma can be the school bully who sits next to you, go psst, psst, because they know that annoys you, right? Trauma can come at many different levels. Trauma can come with a divorce. Trauma can come with a move, or trauma can just be your seatmate at school who is always picking at your weak spots. So we can't underemphasize trauma in dealing with the disabilities of all sorts, including ADHD. But trauma is constantly impacting and eating away at the brain, so that as we are working to resolve the trauma, we are also working to bring the brain more and more on board to be able to focus and pay attention. And how do we do that? We go back to what is missing in the developmental sequence. What did they miss in that first year? In the first year of life, our brain learns 50% of everything it's ever going to know. How can that be? If we learn French, if we become an ambassador to Belgium, if we study politics and international relations, how can the first 50% be in the first year? Well, the first 50% is, how do I see? How do I track? What is love? What's another human being? How do I eat? How do I poop? How do I use this? All 10 of them, all 10 of these fingers. Without that first 50%, the next 50% is impossible. So we need that first year of life to develop all these powerful foundations. One of those foundations, of course, is how do the two sides of the brain talk to each other, which leads to how do I self-regulate? How do I attend and focus? So there's a lot that's happening in that first year. And so we go back and we take a look at what has happened in those first 12 months of life. And then, and in the first 2 years of life, and where has trauma interrupted it, either at the time or even later on, or even prior to birth, and fill in those missing gaps by replicating the developmental sequence. The developmental sequence being all of those reflexes and movement and sensation which build and integrate the brain. So I thought I'd bring in a third issue out of maybe half a dozen, 2 dozen, many issues that we could be looking at. But another issue that comes to mind is their visual motor skills. So a lot of the kids that we work with, because of these other factors, their eyes may not be able to focus. And I work with several vision therapists, and the vision therapists that I've worked with, I've asked, well, focus, that word focus, it's an interesting word. It implies both what you're doing with your mind and what you're doing with your eyes. How are they different? And vision therapists I've spoken with said, essentially, they're the same. If you can't focus your eyes, you can't focus your thoughts. So one of the things that happens, one of many things that can happen, is that when we get under stress, our eyes are going to turn out. They're going to diverge. Cortisol, that stress hormone, causes our eyes to start pulling apart. Why would that be? Well, if you think about us as an evolutionary species that has evolved, when we lived in the savannas of Africa, if we're being chased by something, we have to scan our horizon because survival is always more important than learning. So if we're scanning our horizon, if we're turning our eyes out to look for danger, how could we focus on the words on the page? If our eyes can't focus, our brain can't focus. So we need to have our visual motor skills intact as well. And it's one of many things that I see with children who have this diagnosis of ADHD, which again, I don't treat ADHD, I treat the brain itself. If ADHD is not present after we're working, then that makes me really happy.
Mm-hmm. So these visual skills, it is pretty common. What would one do then? Would you go for vision therapy, and or is there something almost before vision therapy? Like, what's the relationship between those two?
That's such a brilliant question. We are a species designed to put our visual motor skills in place. If we weren't, we wouldn't be a very efficient species. So during the time that the child is crawling on their belly, they are developing some of their horizontal tracking skills, and they're triggering the nerves that go to the muscles that pull the eyes out so that we don't end up cross-eyed. By the time we're on hands and knees, we're stimulating the part of the brain that deals with some of our vertical tracking skills and how our eyes converge, the nerves that go to the muscles that pull the eyes into alignment. So when I'm working with children, and I work with many vision therapists, and I love vision therapy, and I think it can be really important, but we want to make sure that the child has gone through the normal developmental sequence, that we've done everything that we can, that nature has already provided us. Nature provides a way for the eyes to track and align. So once we've been through those activities, if there is some residual visual motor issue that needs to be resolved for whatever of any number of reasons, we can also use vision therapy. So I've worked with many vision therapists with children who definitely have eyes that don't track, that don't align. And we get a lot of resolution through this work, and sometimes we need to move them on into vision therapy. But without the support of a healthy brain, eye exercises alone will probably not do it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Do you know what I really appreciated about what you were just saying was connecting the movement that one would get as an infant to the brain development. Can you go into details on maybe a few other areas so that people can associate the impact of what is used? Perhaps, like, I know like you alluded to before, these swings and things like that, so that if we can start to identify if what was missed, or identify what might have been missed and see what might have been missed and the downstream ramifications of that.
Yes. Well, basically, and the big, 30,000-foot vision of this is that we create our own brain through movement. Babies don't learn to move. They move in order to learn. So every system, from how our shoulders and hips align, to how our eyes track, to how we're processing incoming sound, to how we deal with fear or anxiety, everything is developed during several different phases of infancy. My project, The Brain Nanny, is a project that is designed to take typical babies through the developmental sequence so they don't miss any of their tummy crawling and the reflexes that are associated and the sensory input they need, so that we take them clear through the second year of life, doing lots of hands and knees creeping, doing the associated reflexes and the sensory that child needs, so that when we get a child who has gone through the developmental sequence, they are able to move in a coordinated way. They know where their body is in space. They know where their midline is. Their eyes track and align. They can process incoming sensory information. So what might be missing could lead to diagnoses such as sensory processing disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, attention deficit disorder, dyslexia, dysgraphia. We have, like, the way that I conceive of this, I live in the Northwest, and in the fall, there are mushrooms. There are mushrooms that grow all over the place. And so if you go out to the woods, to the mountains, you pick a mushroom here and a mushroom here and a mushroom here. But you know that underneath that, there's a whole mycelium that's feeding these mushrooms up to the surface. When I'm looking at the brain, any diagnosis may present as issues that are arising from that brain, from the underlying brain functions, all of which need to be in place 24 hours a day, supporting everything from our waking, sleeping cycles, from our ability to read Shakespeare. So to detail that out in the last few minutes would be a little bit hard, but all of us, we start with our brain. And without those foundations in place, if you keep thinking of foundations, think of foundations. If we have the proper foundations in a house, the walls are straight and the ceiling doesn't leak and the paintings hang straight on the walls. If your foundation is weak, you might have just a little crack in the wall. You might have a leak in the roof, or the whole house could fall down. So we never know what the foundational issues might cause, but we know that without those foundations, we can never be as psychologically, emotionally, socially, physically, or academically as whole as we were intended to be. So we want to make sure that the foundations are all in place. That's not a very thorough answer to your question.
But that's very helpful. And then what I'm understanding is that by observing the challenges or how movement or functional abilities of children and even adults, you can pick out or correlate that back to the developmental movements that would be helpful for them to learn those patterns and build those neural pathways, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct. In the absence of any degenerative disease, the majority of the issues that children come in with are associated with those brain functions. And there definitely are exceptions. And if I might say just one more thing before we close, people say, what about genetics? Genetics comes in. And I would like to offer to people that are listening that if you, as a mom, say, had an aunt with osteoporosis and a grandmother with osteoporosis, and your mother had osteoporosis, you would certainly think, I've got a genetic predisposition to osteoporosis, but you wouldn't just let it unfold. You would do everything that you could to take the right minerals, do the right exercises, do the right weight bearing, and to assure yourself that you did not develop full-blown osteoporosis. And it's the same, I believe, with situations like ADHD or raging behavior or sensory processing disorders, that if we know that this runs in the family, then we want to do everything that we can to make sure that this infant, this new one, gets all of their neurodevelopmental activities in place to have the best possible outcome, to avoid as much as possible that genetic trajectory.
Mhm, mhm.
So any other?
Thank you. And where can our listeners find you online?
Very good question. My Facebook group is Neurological Reorganization with Bette Lamont. My email address is developmentalmovement@gmail.com. And I do have a website, neurologicalreorganization.org. But I think I'm also only the Bette Lamont in the country, BetteLamont. So it's kind of easy to find me if you poke around on social media. There are videos here, there, and everywhere. And I would love to meet anyone who has any questions, because I think we can do better for kids. I think we can make their lives easier, because I really think children, they want to do well. And I want to support them in that.
Awesome. I appreciate your message in that so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And yes, appreciate the invitation to reach out to you and to connect.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Veronica.
And we'll keep in touch. Bye.